So Rob, one of the main things I wanted to start with was kind of introducing yourself. You know, who you are, where you're from, what you have specialized in, studying wise, and kind of shows about where you've been.
Okay, I'm Rob Sackett. I'm a professor of history, University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. I'm about to embark on my 44th year as a member of the faculty here. Uh, well, I was raised in a little town in Kansas, the son of two English professors at a local college. And I studied philosophy as an undergraduate, have a doctorate in history. My focus in history is modern Europe, which we define strangely
Mm,
as 18th century or so to the present. The country of my specialization is really Germany.
mm,
I lived in Germany for several years. My research here, that is for my dissertation, was spent at the University of Munich. I then I lived and worked in what was then West Germany.
mm.
I was at an old and rare bookstore in Dusseldorf, altogether out of academia after I'd finished my dissertation. But I kept applying for jobs on and off in the United States to see if anything shook free. And this job, University of Colorado, Colorado Springs did shake free, and here I am.
Mm.
I've been doing this, as you can see, for a long time.
That's great to hear. It's fascinating too, being able to, be in the country that you specialize in, that you've focused on research wise. And one of the main things I kind of wanted to ask first, while, when I was looking up some of your publications, some of your work, one thing I found really interesting was the intersection that you've kind of done between history and film. And
Yeah.
as someone who goes to school for both film and history, I kind of wanted to ask, what kind of sparked that interest, or maybe what conceptualized it between history and film, and especially between the topics of Germany and even the Holocaust.
Well, that's a good question. I I think from the beginning, I would put films into the syllabi of my history courses. That is from the beginning of my career here. Uh, and the reason I did that, I loved film growing up, and but I think that once I began to study history more seriously in the early 1970s, I would see films that related to the subjects of interest,
Yeah,
and realized that alongside the book learning, alongside the study of documents, the study of sources that were part of my training as an historian, that I was learning something about these subjects by way of film. Uh, I go way back. I remember that there were always in cities of any size there were foreign film festivals, foreign film theaters, and so forth.
yeah.
I remember that I saw, for example, Amarcord by Fellini. I saw that when it came out.
Mm,
I was living in St. Louis.
wow.
I saw The Garden of the Finzi-Cantinis by Vittorio De Sica, more or less when it came out. I saw early films by Louis Malle. So once I began actually teaching the subject, I wanted to make that available to students. Then the entire initiative broadened because I gained a colleague here at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, named Robert von Dasenovsky, who unfortunately has passed away. But he was an expert in the history of literature and film in both Germany and Austria.
Mm.
And he set out to create a film studies program with no faculty whatsoever to do it with. So I thought, I've never had a course in film studies. And I thought, what would I have to do to prepare myself to contribute to this effort, to offer courses that could be cross-listed between history and film? So I read up on on what I would call film aesthetics. In other words, um, the way the film looks or the way the film sounds. I've never made a film, and so that I could integrate that into my teaching
Yeah.
and ask students, what did you get out of this shot? The particular lighting, the particular camera angle. Why was this a low angle shot? Why a high angle? And so I could feel that I was contributing something to the
Yeah.
film studies side of a class, and that's what I've done.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of the most interesting things I think is to kind of delve into the film aesthetics because I think whether we notice it or not, they do have meaning and they do
Oh,
contribute to the story, whether it, wherever it may be.
yeah,
And so one thing I asked, especially as you started creating a course around this, especially within your experience, what are some of the most powerful and or meaningful films that you've used within your teaching?
ay, ay, ay. Well, I have to think about that. I
It's
teach
tough.
a number of films about German history.
Mm,
Um, Start with East Germany. I
yeah.
I've taught The Lives of Others uh,
Mm,
by Henkel von Donnersmarck. I've taught that several times.
mm,
I've taught Goodbye Lenin.
mm, yep,
Um, of course, a number of films that touch upon German history, the Holocaust,
mm,
Second World War. A standby for me is Ida, the Polish film by
yes.
Pawlikowski. The Counterfeiters
Oh yeah.
um, by Huzawitsky, an Austrian film. Uh, In Darkness, Agnieszka Holland, also Europa Europa by
Mm.
Agnieszka Holland. Uh, I teach Downfall, the film about Hitler. Hitler.
Yes, that is a fantastic film.
That is a fantastic film, and I have the students read the commentary by David Bathrick alongside that, where he analyzes it as historical commentary. Uh, yeah, those films. I mean, I remember a while back I was teaching a number of films that had to do with Great Britain,
Yeah.
so-called kitchen sink films, the realistic films of the late 50s, early 60s
Mm.
by Tony Richardson. Saturday Night and Sunday Morning with Albert Finney.
Yeah.
That was a favorite of mine to teach. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all of those films I think are worthy of their own little ramble, you know. And one thing I at least find interesting is that all the films that that you've listed and countless others, I think have a very interesting way of representing, first of all, history, but
mhm.
also trauma and memory of certain things, especially when we go back into the history of Germany. I'd say around, the start of, National Socialism in 1933, and then kind of just uphaving itself continuously. I focus on that because I kind of wanted to ask, do you think that films about Germany, the Holocaust, have kind of changed over the decades and how they represent that trauma or memory? From ones that were made in the 60s or 70s all the way up to ones that are made nowadays.
Well, yeah. I often show The Murderers Are Among Us, which
Mm,
is, I think, the first film
yeah,
in 1946. Actually, much of the production went on in East Berlin under a Soviet authority, under Soviet censor. Um, yeah, if you think about that as a film that touches upon the Holocaust, you can easily see the film, which lasts about an hour and a half, and say, where exactly is the Holocaust in this Holocaust film?
yeah,
Uh, in some ways, it skirts the issue. It's about a physician that's attached to a military unit in the East in Poland in 1942, and he has suffered trauma,
yeah,
terrible trauma from being unable to avert a massacre of villagers
Yeah.
because there had been some partisan activity and evidently a partisan sniper had shot a German soldier, and the reprisals were ferocious.
Yeah.
Uh, and anyone who saw the film then, I think anyone who studied the history would know that the idea of the murder of the Jews was often covered by the Nazi excuse, the Nazi alibi. This was the murder. This was the murder of partisans. That is, the villagers that were killed
Yeah.
were all, were a source of partisan activity. So, but that's never made explicit in the film.
Yeah.
And as far as the Holocaust, at one point there's a newspaper that's upside down on a breakfast table, and you can read that it's about you know millions gassed at Auschwitz.
Yeah.
But there's no allusion to it. It's upside down. The character who put it there wasn't reading the newspaper to find out about Auschwitz. Um, You could say in 1946, when the first impulses in Germany to deny the Holocaust or to shove it off um, onto the villains in the SS or that villain Hitler, there was and only the top Nazi leadership, or sometimes Hitler would be exonerated, and others like Himmler and Goering would be fingered as the as the authorities that put that policy together, that policy of genocide. Um, you could say, well, in 1946, that was still, Wolfgang Staudt, the director, was going out on thin ice because, and in fact, reviews of the movie didn't address what we're addressing it as Holocaust.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the reviews of the movie said, well, the premise of this is flawed. Some of them, the premise of this is wrong. What does this character have to feel guilty about? He did his best. He tried to avert a massacre. Um, it failed. Of course, it failed. The Nazis had all the authority.
Yeah.
Um, so why is he so upset? Why is he a lost soul? Why does he need this wonderful woman played by the new starlet Hildegard Knef to to pull him out of the ditch he's in? So tell me about yourself. In what angle have you looked at this subject, Broden?
One thing that always kind of comes to my mind when I think about this moment in history and how it's kind of played back through film and art, whether it be all the way just, right after it in 46, all the way up until now, I think one thing I think is very hard to capture is the sense that, especially, in movies that were made right after the Holocaust and after the Second World War had ended, is that our lives happened, their lives had happened as this was going on. And so I think for them, it was hard to capture in a sense to where they had the belief, I assume, you know, from films that I have watched of the Holocaust, I feel like a lot of them maybe had this belief that, oh, this happened far away and, there was nothing that could have been done, but this happened, but we weren't connected to it, especially some of the American films I've watched about the Holocaust. And I think in within good faith or not, I think it just perpetuates this idea that, even to now, that the Holocaust was so long ago, World War II was so long ago. It was not. It was not. It was less than 180 years ago now. And
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
and so I think the most blaring alarm is that this happened within, I would consider, modern history. And so it's still
Yeah.
just that part, right? And
Yeah.
so some of these films that you brought up, especially the ones that were in 46, some of the ones I can think of in 52, 54, I think they're actually, especially the ones by Germans or Polish filmmakers, do a very better job at showing that this happened
Yeah.
as my life was going on,
yeah,
and so I think that's a very I think is one of the more important things to capture. Another thing that I think is very, um, especially the films like the Murders Among Us, I think even within that title itself and that film itself does a very good job at perpetuating the fact that the Nazi perpetrators were people just like us. They had
yeah.
traits just like us, and they were normal people that we can see within ourselves or people that we know, friends or family. Um, and that's a very hard thing to do because I think it's very easy for us to look at the Nazis and the Holocaust perpetration like, oh, that's I'm not like that. And that's not like me, and shove it off. But the truth is that they were like us
Yeah.
in some ways or not. And another film that does that amazingly is a more recent one, The Zone of Interest,
Oh, yeah.
which I think was an amazing film.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's kind of like one of the main things that I think about when I think about those films, is
Yeah.
to realize that this is a very modern event.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder, to go back to you, I kind of wonder how you feel about some of the more modern renditions of the Second World War, the Holocaust,
Uh,
and I kind of wonder how you compare and contrast those films. I think it's very interesting because you could go from the perspective of nationality. Well, you could compare how a German filmmaker would make a movie about the Holocaust versus an American, and those are, I think, a easier compare and contrast to make. But what I find more interesting is the temporal aspect. A film made about the Holocaust in 1954 I feel like is going to be a lot different than a film about the Holocaust in 2016. And so I kind of wonder like your thoughts on that.
yeah. Well, there came a point where um, there was an effort to, I would start with something like Europa, Europa of
Yeah.
Nietzsche to Holland. I mean, that film is now, what, 35 years old, but I remember becoming aware that there was a new push to put out the unusual story that shed its own um, unusual light on the Holocaust. Europe is not a bad example of that because really it's about, I mean, in a way, I mean, from time to time, people have called the film simply inappropriate
Yeah.
because, because there's so many jokes in the Holocaust. He's a kind of a rogue character who lives by his wits. I should explain for anyone viewing this podcast. This is a film about a Jewish youth who is able to pass himself off as an ethnic German and lives through the entire Third Reich with this false identity. Needless to say, always um, having to protect his penis from being viewed because because he's undergone circumcision, and that's to be exposed as a male who's undergone circumcision is a death penalty. But how he gets out of all kinds of tight spots um, by his wits and just remarkable good fortune. Yeah, the audience is often laughing during the film about this. But I saw this film a number of times, and a student said something. This would be maybe the third or fourth time I ever showed it. She said, there's a representation of Kristallnacht, which is the Nazis' first real strong, coordinated initiative of violence. This is in November of 1938. And it happens in the midst of this boy's bar mitzvah. She said, it's important that this happened in the midst of a bar mitzvah. It interrupted the bar mitzvah So he's had his identity as a Jewish male taken from him.
Yeah.
And he's in this situation where Nazi law and Nazi racial law stamps a racial identity on everyone, but he's able, by hook or by crook, to escape that racial identity. And I think that's the interest in the film.
Yeah.
Uh, More recent films, well, like Agnieszka Holland, I think In Darkness, the rescue effort in one of the sewers or in the sewers of what was then Lvov, which was now Lviv, the shift to the border between Poland and what is now Ukraine.
Mm.
The Counterfeiters is a nice and crazy story. Um, Hold it to the standard of accuracy. Well, uh, one of the main characters is the author of the memory of the memoir that is the basis of the script of that.
Yeah.
And it really, I mean, the counterfeiting operation, which was held at Sachsenhausen, a concentration camp outside of Berlin, was an operation that the Nazis, in fact, instigated using Jewish prisoners from camps throughout Europe who had specialties that could lead to counterfeiting both the British pound sterling and the American dollar. The idea being that you swamp the two major enemies in the West with false currency and wreck their economies and drive them out of the war. Nothing ever really came of this on that scale, but the director turns this into a story about the moral dilemma of prisoners who have who have the slightest ability to be able to decide whether to serve the Nazi war effort, which the Nazis expect of them, or to undermine the Nazi war effort by only seeming to serve them, drawing out this hope that they have of counterfeit currency. And the two main characters become it's kind of like a war of the moral titans.
Mm.
One of them has this position, the other that position. One of them wants to save the 40 members of the unit at all cost. And when whatever happens in the wider war, one of them wants to play the Nazis, and they have this terrible, almost love-hate relationship because they're such strong characters, but they're at complete odds. Well, there's no evidence that anything of the kind happened,
Yeah.
but it's a great film, and it makes you think about something that. I mean, that was what the real character in Burger. First place, the character that the Burger character was based on was not German at all. He was Slovakian,
Mm.
but he attended the filmings and became quite close with the filmmaker and all the actors. After somebody was asked, "What did he think?" He said, "Well, it's a nice film. It doesn't have much to do with my life,
Yeah.
though."
Yeah. I think films have a natural, just, I think whether we like it or not, they have a natural way of doing that. There's such a dramatization and,
Yeah,
creative liberties just are
good
made.
point.
And, yeah, some people just lean into that because I think it's able to craft a more compelling story that, like you said, can make them think about um the the subject matter at hand. Um, and I've wondered, you have written a lot about this, about especially Holocaust imagery, and I've I kind of wonder like what you've learned. I mean, I've wondered what you have learned since reading about this and writing about this.
Mm.
Especially the 1960s. I mean, how did film and media, shape shape that engagement that I think we've had with this topic? People find it so fascinating how this has happened, and I think film and other art forms have played a part in that.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I've looked at this more in regard to Germany than in regard to any other country. Um, Uh, I think I come back to a play that was produced. It's by a written by a German Jew who had immigrated to Sweden. It's called in German Die Ermittlung, translated as what? I guess the investigation is the translation of it.
Mm,
Peter Weiss. And he used testimony from the Auschwitz trial, which happened in Frankfurt am Main between 1963 and 1965. He used testimony um, from victims who had traveled who survivors who had traveled to Frankfurt to give testimony, um, and and also included the defendants in the trial as well.
mm,
Some of them had been particularly um, inappropriate, provocative um, during the trial, and he put this all into a play that was shown in, I'm sure, in theaters in every major city. A long run, every major city in both West and East Germany, and it did get across the Holocaust. I think it's a key moment in what Germans call Aufarbeitung der Vergangenheit, which means coming to terms with the past.
mm.
That said, obviously not everyone went,
Yeah,
and although millions evidently did, but one of the things that has interested me about German coming to terms with the past is that there are these there are these crucial moments, like like the film the Diary of Anne Frank as a paperback, then the stage play, then the film made by George Stevens, the American film starring Millie Perkins as Anne.
yeah,
Um, and there's this, warming up of interest among Germans to the Holocaust. They want to know more. They want to, in some way, come to terms with it, to see where the guilt lies, to come to terms with the issue of responsibility. Young people, what did my father do? What did my mother do? What were my parents' positions in all of this? Then it seems to me there's kind of a dying down of interest. Um, and I've never been able to see any kind of logic to why it heats up and why it cools down.
yeah.
Um, but in 1979, there was the American show, was just called Holocaust. It was a mini series that we ran in this country and then appeared on German television in, I would say the spring of 1979. And I mean, that was a sensation. Talk radio in Germany was absolutely lit up by this miniseries in 1979. Women were calling in saying, my husband was in the SS. I had no idea what a swine he was, and I'm going to divorce him. It was just, this families were rent apart, children making accusations against their fathers. Um, why have you never talked to me about this? And so forth. And then it seems to me there's a kind of dying down. Um, yeah, then, but I do think, I mean, I agree with historians, um, well, like, what's his name, the historian at Wayne State. I've got his book over there. I could go look at his. Oh, Andrew Port, of course. I agree with historians that the 1980s was for West Germany and then the enlarged Germany a kind of turning point, that the idea that that German culture hinges upon, among other things, memory of the Nazi era, including Nazi crime, including the Holocaust. That that was an era when it was really a turning point.
Mm.
And yeah, that seems correct to me. Or this book by Susan Neiman, the philosopher who lives in Berlin, who wrote, what's it called? Learning from the Germans. That's more or less the conclusion that she arrives at. So have I answered the question? What was the question?
Well, no, I think you actually do because I was asking about how especially film and other media and art forms kind of influence the popularity of learning about the Holocaust and I find it interesting that, the 1980s was that pivotal moment in West Germany where they started to look in the past and started to really learn from what what had happened. And one thing I find interesting about that is, 35 years later, then they really started to look at it, which I find interesting. Um, but also I'm not surprised at the same time because I think that has happened with a lot of events.
Hmm.
But what I wonder and what question that makes me, think of is how do I, from when you started teaching, film and history and once again within the context of Germany and the Holocaust specifically, I wonder if you see generational differences in how students have responded to
Oh,
these films about these topics, especially with those difficult and complex issues and events. I wonder what differences you've seen from students that you've taught when you first started to
yeah.
now.
Well, um, by the time I started teaching this subject and teaching in general, um, we were well into the 1980s, and students would come along who had read The Diary of Anne Frank in school, or they had read Night by Elie Wiesel. Um, so I'd assigned those books sometimes. Um, I would assign Survival in Auschwitz by Primo Levi. So I think it had already become more firm in American culture that this was a subject that you learned about in school, that this was a horrible thing that this would be compared with in a very general way with American slavery, that it would be compared with the treatment of Native Americans, which of course you know they have different narrative lines, those atrocities, than this one. For one thing, the Holocaust really, as a um, in its full form, um, was over and done with in about 4 years.
Yeah.
So it's very different than the taking of land from Native Americans, which stretched out over decades and centuries. Um, in terms of film alerting people, then Schindler's List um, was shown.
Yeah.
Come to school who had seen Schindler's List come to the university, and I always thought that was a little bit of a mixed bag, because some had the idea that, well, why did all these Jews have to die? I mean, just find a Schindler and hook on with him, and you'll make it through, most of you. And that was not, I think, the sense of the film.
No.
Some students took it that way. Um, there are films from Germany from the 60s that have not been, or I don't know that they've been translated. Sometimes I look for films from that era and they have not been translated. Although um, The Murderers Are Among Us has, and that's a good film. Um, Good film for teaching. Of course, the Holocaust is all associated with other subjects having to do with Nazi Germany, like resistance films.
Yeah.
You know, the what was this called? It was a film by G.W. Pabst. I think in English it was called maybe Jackboot Soldiers or something.
Mm.
Called in German the Men of the 20th. of July about the assassination attempt.
Yeah.
Um, I've never taught that film, but in Germany, obviously, a number of subjects began to come up together. The Holocaust, sort of with, sort of sputtering interest, I would say, in that subject. Suddenly it was there and Germans would talk about it, and then it would seem to recede. Resistance, but also the murder of the handicapped.
Mm. Yeah.
That also would come up, and families remembered that had gone on in their midst. That was a film, that was a crime that took place on German soil. It
Yeah.
wasn't, you know, there were no deportations of German Jews to Poland for Germans knew, but they didn't know details. Mm. So yeah,
Yeah. Um, One thing that kind of always comes to my mind, and you actually had brought this up at the start, but film aesthetics
yeah.
and all these different types of complex avenues that films go down, cinematography, editing, music, angles, all of those intricate things. And I wonder how you feel about this especially, but I wonder what role do you think that these film aesthetics have in historical films, to communicate certain ideas or emotions with the audience. I wonder how you feel about what roles those play, especially in films that are supposed to captivate a strong
Sure.
emotion. You just brought up Schindler's List. I think that's a perfect example of a
Mhm,
film that uses its film aesthetics very well. So
mhm.
I wonder how you feel about that.
Well, take The Murderers Are Among Us as an example. First place, Staude has Berlin,
Yep.
and and these remarkable eerie shapes of buildings, some of which collapse actually on screen. Um, that where these characters are walking through. I mean, the city was in ruins.
Yeah.
Um, he uses that to good effect, to create this atmosphere of complete, you know, destruction, dilapidation, uh, hopelessness. Um, he's also got the windows are forever cracked,
Yeah.
and uh, so you get the images and mirrors are cracked. So you get these wonderful images of characters whose whose images are divided because of a cracked mirror that they're standing close to.
Yeah.
You know what, what who is this character really? There seem to be many sides to this. And yeah, that's brilliant. When I first saw The Murders Are Among Us, I thought that I compared it to, of all things, John Ford. What's the name of the valley that he used in his old westerns, like Stagecoach? Is it Monument Valley in
I,
California?
I think it is actually Monument Valley. I'd have to look that up, but that sounds right.
But you have these black and white films with these incredible structures of rock through which the characters are going in Stagecoach or My Darling Clementine, the one that stars Henry Fonda and Walter Brennan. And I thought, I don't know that Wolfgang Staude had any exposure to John
Yeah.
Ford. That would be a research project.
Yeah.
But there was a similar kind of just eeriness uh,
Hmm.
about the setting.
Yeah, I think some of them are, especially, with settings, especially, they can be so eerie. One when we talk about eerie settings, one that I always kind of get reminded of is The Pianist. When Yeah, The Pianist especially, I think once you get to that second later half of the film and um we start to see the destruction of the Nazis' blitzkrieg, I think, and the destroyed cities is
Yeah.
one thing that always comes to mind. Is such a eerie and creepy setting.
Now remind me, that's Warsaw, right?
That yeah, I believe that is Warsaw. Yeah, I almost thought it was Germany for a second, but I'm pretty sure that is Warsaw that he's in. Yeah, it has to be Warsaw. But yeah, even that is a perfect example that I always kind of think of, especially when he's looking for food and he's running through the buildings. And I think it was at that time also when the Soviets started to enter the city.
Yeah,
It's just a very, I don't even know what other word to use to describe it, just eerie. It's just off-putting
yeah,
how different, how that even would have felt to actually live through, and to have that on screen too is very, very captivating. And as I give you that answer, it also makes me think of a question that I kind of think about is because a lot of these films are about historical characters. A lot of these films just are The Pianist, Schindler's List. But I also think there's a great deal of films that can use fictional characters to kind of provide the same or even more than um to provide understanding and to provide this idea and thought to help the audience understand what really is this about. And so I just thought about that because I started thinking about Schindler's List and The Pianist. Then I started thinking about some of the films that are historical fiction that take place during World War II or the Holocaust, but have fictional characters. And so um, I wonder how you feel about this, but can fictional characters in historical films reveal truths about the time period just as powerfully as real historical figures shown in film?
yeah. That's a good question. Um, and as far as I know, the character, I mean, sometimes a fictional character is built on traits that a script writer has seen in someone real, you
Yeah.
know, character. But then there's, I mean, for example, in the counterfeiters, there is a Sordovich, and there was a Burger. Sordovich is an invented name, but there was a basic character. But they are in effect fictional characters. There's the movie Fateless by hold on, the Hungarian director. It's built on it's well. Here we go. I mean, is this is this a fictional character? This is based upon um, a, a memoir by a memoir. The autobiography. It's an autobiography. It's a writing by a Holocaust survivor. He survived Buchenwald, and he
Yeah.
was part of those massive deportations from Hungary in 1944 that were arranged by Adolf Eichmann. And he
Hmm.
survived Buchenwald and wrote books. Wrote a book called somehow this in the translation of the novel or book is different from the translation of the film called Fatelessness, the book Fateless. Excuse me, the book Fatelessness, the film Fateless. Uh, but characters was always quick to say, this is not autobiography. This is not autobiography. And that it was an invention. Well, of course, he knew enough about Buchenwald and about the deportation to Buchenwald to pull this off. But there's a fantastic movie that would have to be put more, I think, in the realm of fiction than fact. Mhm.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's very fascinating how some films, whether based on historical events or people, versus ones that, have historically backdrops but fictional characters. I think to answer that question myself, I do think they can.
Yeah, sure.
But also I think that at least me personally, I find more emotional emotional capture within real historical people. And you brought up this film earlier, but it's one of the main things that I kind of think of is Downfall. I think about Downfall all the
Oh, yeah.
time. I rewatch Downfall all the time, and I think why it's so captivating to me is that it shows those final days in that bunker. And no one could truly know. I believe it's based on a memoir of the lady of who the main character is, but
Right.
yeah. But still, it's like I don't think a film has done that better than Downfall. I just don't think it has. I think it's such a unique perspective.
Mhm.
And that's all, for the most part, real people in
Oh,
that.
yeah, yeah. Hmm.
And I think that film is very good at having that captured. Um, but another question that I had thought of this question before coming on here today, and I can kind of assume what the answer may be, but I just wanted to ask because I think it's interesting, especially when we talk about films. Do you think students learn or are more emotionally engaged better with history when it's introduced through a film rather than textbooks? I know textbooks are hard nowadays, but I wonder how you feel about that, especially teaching through and with films.
Well, I think, I mean, I teach, historical survey work sometimes. Like when I teach the Holocaust, I often teach the book by Peter Hayes, which is called Why Explaining the Holocaust. And I think that to get into either personal narratives, memoir literature, or films, or for that matter, imaginative literature, um, you certainly need a framework. Otherwise, there are illusions being made, and the students don't catch the illusion.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say there are books that can grab. I'm very high right now on a on a memoir by it's called The Black Seasons, and his name will come to me. Um, he's a Pole, a Polish Jew who survived. He was in the Warsaw Ghetto as a boy of about 7 or 8, I gather. Oh, what is his name? Why can't I think of his name? I have to go rummage around in my books, and I don't want to do that. Um, yeah, and they were in the Warsaw Ghetto, and his parents bribed their way out. And then
Wow.
they were living really one step ahead of disaster for the next 3 years, until, liberation by, well, they were in Poland. The liberation came, of course, through the Red Army. All of them survived. Um, I mean, all of them were almost permanently in danger. There came a point when the boy was separated from the boy and the mother were separated from the father, um, who was arrested and taken as a slave laborer to Germany. Remarkably, was not discovered as a Jew, and in this way, survived the war. Then the boy and the mother, there was no way to give both of them a fake so-called Aryan identity,
Yeah.
and so they were separated. The boy ended up in a Catholic boarding school the very east of Poland. But it's tremendously moving, for because the author, who became a professor of Polish literature and a very highly thought of literary scholar in Poland, um, really knows how to tell a story, uh, and to um, add interest to incidental characters along the way who help or in some cases threaten him. It's tremendous, and I know that the students are very affected by it. Michael Glovinsky. There, I knew
Mm.
I knew if I rattled on, I would come to his name. Um, People are very affected by Night by Elie Wiesel. Um, Well, that's an interesting story too, because uh, people don't often understand that the first version of that was a a a massive work in in Yiddish, and that it was only later that I believe he wrote the first um, the first manuscript of that in French in its current form. It's a little book. It's 120 pages long, and he also did so in when he was in touch with one of the great French um, literary authors of the 1950s. Who was it? I think it was Marois, and I'd have to check that. But so it really is sculpted from an original text that is very different from it, a great deal longer, that doesn't have all of the themes that we associate with Night by Elie Wiesel. So it also has a quality of fiction or of literarization, if I could put it that way.
Yeah.
And but it's one of the great books about the Holocaust, and it grabs students. I mean, when he's, at the very end, looking at himself in the mirror, and he's made it through the long trek from Auschwitz. He's there. His father has died. He feels the guilt. That at the last he should have, at the very last, he should have attended to his father. His father passed away. He was, I guess, on another bunk. Didn't pay attention. And he looks at himself in the mirror, um, cannot recognize himself. Um, that grabs students. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, I'm I think also alert to books that can have that impact.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I books books I think are fascinatingly overlooked sometimes because I think it's easy to find them more, what's the word? I would say more hard to enter at least than maybe a film, which could be an obvious observation, but you're saying that a lot of these books, capture students, which is great because just from what you've told me, I'm already captured by, the little log line you've given me of them. And I wonder, after, if you want to switch to books for a moment here, or even we could do this with films, especially after, students are done reading or watching these works. I wonder, what are some of the most interesting things that maybe you've seen students comment or discuss on after reading or writing these, historical works, films or books. Let's just do that. And I wonder if they yeah. I wonder if they tend to like reinforce or challenge some of the main ideas or perspectives that we've had on this part of history.
Well, I'll give you an example. There's a book called Salvaged Pages, which is a compilation of 14 Holocaust diaries by adolescents, young people. About half of them survived the Holocaust, half of them didn't. Uh, when I got hold of the book, I'd only heard of one of the diarists. It was complete news to me. One of my former professors who could speak and read Yiddish was a translator of one of the diaries. And just this past semester, we read in class, we read, I think, three of the diaries in common. But then I said, these are 14 diaries. You pick any one of them and you make it the centerpiece of a research project. And these research projects were absolutely fascinating. Um, you know, whether whether a young person caught in the Holocaust would develop a more intense sense of what Judaism was.
Yeah.
Um, what happens to family relationships when families are, for example, um, being concealed by non-Jews, usually, with the expectation rather considerable payments,
Hmm.
what happens to family relationships? What happens to the relationship between the protector and the person who's being protected?
Yeah.
So yeah, they saw all kinds of things. I can think of one paper that matched, I can't remember which diary it was, but with theories of trauma.
Mm.
Uh, so yeah, I mean it's this feeling that people may have that the people who were um, living through the Holocaust, awaiting disaster in many cases, that they were just crumpled into themselves without any without any perspectives on anything besides simply the minute by minute um, torment and the hope of survival.
Yeah.
People in Theresienstadt, for example, who would take advantage of classes that Jewish teachers offered um, because they wanted to learn. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes that was, sometimes what happened to them is they were sent on to Auschwitz and died. Sometimes they could look back on it and recall, learning English or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's, I guess the Anne Frank story has a lot of that effect. There she is, you know, reading Dickens to improve her English and
Yeah.
thinking about American stars that she'd seen in movies before the family went into hiding.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating how some of these popular stories still, especially, I think I believe Anne Frank is the greatest example of that. Still, you know, are shown to the younger generations that are still coming in as one. That's one of the main things that are shown. It's what I was shown, you
Yeah,
know. What I wonder, what do you notice about, maybe people who just come into college, younger individuals
yeah,
engage with those difficult, historical subjects, especially through something visual like film. Like, what do
yeah.
you notice? Like, what are some of the things that you notice about when they start really taking in these events and learning about it?
That they reflect on them deeply. Very satisfied with the way students respond
Mm.
to films or to stories like those of the salvaged pages. Um, yeah, sometimes I show documentaries of one kind or another.
Mm.
Weapons of the Spirit, which is
Oh
about
yeah.
and by the way, of those 14 diaries, 14 diarists, the one that I'd heard of was Peter Feigl, and he was one of the Jewish boys saved and Jewish adolescents saved in in Le Chambon, the French village. So
Really?
when I found his diary, I was, wait, I know which one that is. Mhm.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, it is fascinating. I also think one thing I think that happens is reflecting, yes, but also I think like on ourselves, and to take a look at, I think, our lives, and I think mainly in a sense is to realize, I mean, how horrible things can be.
Mhm.
And I think it's easy, especially in America, to kind of get wrapped up in our problems, but to
Yeah,
realize that, no, that pe people had it much worse.
people had it
Um,
worse.
yeah,
But there are also the inspirational stories, and they can't be lost track of either. That
no,
first village,
no,
Chambon,
it's
people saved whatever, 1,200, 1,400 Jews.
yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up because it's so easy to drown in the horribleness of it,
Yeah,
of which it is, but also yes, those stories.
yeah,
I know Oscar Schindler, another one too. Th those stories I think have a way of finding light in the dark, and I find them absolutely fascinating. And to close this out, to ask one final question, I really wonder this, because you're your expertise on this is truly uh expansive, and I wonder, if you could recommend one film uh, about so let's do the Holocaust to everyone listening to
Well,
better understand the human side of it, what would it be and why?
well, it might be in the counterfeiters.
Really?
Um, the I think Ida.
Mm,
Um, I mean, that's such an incredible story. The 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 Catholic novitiate who finds out it's 1960, it's Poland. She finds out that well, she knows that she's an orphan girl and she's been in the convent since forever, evidently, or as far back as she can remember. And then suddenly her past is revealed, that she's a survivor, that all of her family were killed. And in the Holocaust, they were Jews. And she alone, because she was female, because she had light colored hair, and because females can't be circumcised, she alone was handed to a Catholic priest who, and said, save her.
yeah,
And he handed her along to a convent, and then the entire rest of her life becomes exposed in a period of well, 3 days, something like that. And the way she takes control of that.
yeah.
And Ida is quite something. I wouldn't overlook In Darkness by Agnieszka Holland,
Mm,
saving the Jews in the sewers of then Lvov, now Lviv. Um, I mean, it's interesting because the man who is sewer administrator who organizes this is primarily interested in money and is full of anti-Semitism of the most ordinary sort.
yeah,
Uh, but gradually, the human side of this catches him. Uh, it's inspirational, and he is among the what do they call it, Yad Vashem, and the righteous among the nations.
mm,
Died by an unusual accident shortly thereafter, 1946.
mm,
Um, but he and his wife, I believe, both are there. But he took an interesting course. At first, his primary interest was in squeezing as much wealth out of the Jews as he could,
yeah.
with lots of snide comments along the way about Jews and their money.
Hmm.
So, but ended up as among the righteous among the nations. So
Yeah, yeah.
those,
It's yeah, hard to pick one.
yeah,
Yeah, but no, I think all those ones are great. I think all of them honestly could be the one.
yeah,
Because I think they do a very good job at at one thing, and I think that's showing triumph. I think that even throughout this horrible thing that we've been shown and been told about, like people even within that horrible time, people did the right thing and people made it out. And I think those are some
yeah.
of the best stories.
Some some did the right thing, and then
So,
sometimes there's this vacillation. Sometimes there's this vacillation. And there
yeah,
were people involved in the plot to assassinate Hitler who
yeah,
themselves had been, would have to be regarded as war criminals.
yeah,
So you go figure. I mean,
yeah,
were they just opportunists? Were
mm,
they just concerned that Germany was losing the war and it was time to get rid of Hitler, who was the source of all of these terrible military decisions? You go figure.
yeah. Complex questions with even more complicated answers.
Yeah.
So, Rob, thank you for coming on here. Thank you
Roden.
for talking.
Thank
That was
you.
great. Your expertise is admirable. I'll say
Well,
that.
thank you.
So
As is yours. I mean, you're obviously quite a student of these subjects.
I try to be. I try to be, and it's only as time goes on, I only assume that grows. So
Well,
we'll
yeah,
see.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, here I am looking back at movies I saw in the 1970s.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Yeah, and you'll think about those films. I think about films that I saw when I was a child, and I'm pretty sure I'll think back to them as long as I can remember, and
Yeah.
they will stick with you. As much as, the films that we talk about today, they'll stick with you. There's some of those films. So
Some of the topics you've covered in your podcasts.
yeah, so I mean, so first of all, it kind of started with film. I go for, my major is film, particularly filmmaking. So it's less about studying the aesthetics and more about like how do you actually create a film. Um, but in return, I some of my first episodes were some of my film professors and just talked about like particularly writing. I am more, when it comes to filmmaking, I'm more interested in directing and writing. Those are some of the things I'm kind of looking for in grad school. I'm a big school guy, so I'm kind of planning on being in school forever. Um,
Good.
but as it's gone on, what I've kind of realized is that I love films, but what do I want to make films about? And that's history. I love history. All of the ideas I've had are intrinsically bound in history. Some of the films I wanted to make are about JFK's presidency. And so like I had a historian on a few weeks ago named Greg Whitesides, and he's a historic professor from the University of Colorado in Denver. That's where I go. And we talked about like U.S. foreign policy, JFK, Vietnam. Some I've had some other professors on from CU Boulder, and we talked about the history of Israel and the Middle East.
Oh,
And
good.
that was a very cool episode. Um, God, just this last week I had an historian on called his name was Gabriel Finkelstein, and that was more about the history of science, physics and quantum mechanics, and that was really cool. I like science, so that was cool to talk about. So yeah, it kind of fluctuates between film and history, and so that's one of the main reasons why I reached out to you because you had a great expertise and in academic research and interest within both, and so that
Yeah.
was very cool to see. So
Hey, by
yeah,
the way, speaking of Kennedy, I saw him.
really.
Yeah, I was 8 years old.
Really? Yeah. See, that's like that stuff is just so cool to me. Like I can only look up Wikipedia and photos. And so like I just think that's so cool like how see that's right there's why I love history because there are so many multifaceted things about JFK and his presidency and to see and to hear someone that like oh I saw him it's like oh my gosh like that's history right there.
He came
How
to the little town in Kansas where I'm from.
really?
He spoke because what's the story? The head of the Democratic Party in Kansas lived in my hometown.
Mm,
Kennedy, for whatever reason during his campaign, needed to, I mean, I think he knew he was going to lose Kansas's electoral votes.
yeah.
He showed up in my hometown. And he was, 10 feet away from me. Uh,
Mm,
I went with my dad, and there he was. It was I was stunned. This kid, I knew that my father admired him, but politics, I knew I was 8 years old. But
yeah.
suddenly this person who seemed, was like a character from one of the shows I watched.
Yeah.
He's right in front of me. That's something.
Yeah, that is just fascinating. And it's so cool to hear that.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, quite a memory.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just so cool to
Well, you've
hear.
got to, yeah, it's really admirable what you're doing, getting all of these, your studies and also the range of these subjects that you're interested in for your podcasts. And good luck with
Yeah.
filmmaking.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, I'm interested in everything. I love everything. I kind of, even though film is such a fine it's a fine arts. I tend to find that I want to make films about it, foundational things. I think, history, science, just things like that I think are just so fascinating. I have a hard time getting into like fantasy and really like hardcore fiction. I cannot for the life of me read it or watch it. I can't stand it really. But history, yeah, that's just really the main one that stands out to me. There's a book, um, and we're talking about World War II and the Nazis. There's a book called I think it's just called the Nuremberg Trials, and I forget who it's by. I can't It's really gonna bother me if I don't know. I'm gonna look it up really quick. Who wrote this book? Uh, Ann Tusa is her name.
Hmm.
She's a very good author. She's written a lot of books about it, and she wrote a book on the Nuremberg trials, and that is just one book I would love to turn into a film. And I I am just fascinated by the Nuremberg trials. I think they're really cool. I would love to like you know especially with like Herman Goring as a character. I think they're so fascinating, and especially even like having the cases open, the Soviet case, the French case, the American case. I think those are just like such cool just parts because I think especially post World War II and the aftermath of World War II is so fascinating, and I think the Nuremberg trials is just one of those things I'm just so fascinated by. And so that's
Is
just an
there,
example of like something I would want to turn into a film that's connected to history, stuff like that.
did you ever see Judgment at Nuremberg?
Yes, that that is one of my favorite movies of all
Yeah.
time. I think that is I seriously one of my top five favorite movies.
And
I
how about this book, Soviet Judgment at Nuremberg by Francine Hirsch?
mm, Soviet
It,
judgment at Nuremberg, you
yeah,
said? Yeah.
it really shows the Soviet perspective and the Soviet role in a way that I think Americans have always diminished.
Yeah, yeah, no, they have, and that's very interesting. And yeah, and the book just about their perspective, their case, really, is it?
Yeah, it's about the Nuremberg trials, but
Mm-hmm.
it's about, for example, I never knew that that one of the ideas behind the statutes, the laws that were being used to try these defendants
Mm-hmm.
came from a Soviet jurist
Mm.
by the name of Trainin. I had no idea until I read the book. I think the idea of a conspiracy against the peace, that to conspire against the peace could be called a violation of international law. That
Yeah.
went back to him. And the relationship between, well, the way Jackson, for example, you know, comported himself at the trial and in relationship to the Soviets. Of course, the Soviets wanted a very different trial.
Yeah.
And they wanted a show trial, like they'd had in Moscow in the 1930s with Stalin's rivals. They
Mm-hmm.
forced the Nazis you know, to confess to horrible crimes and then execute them.
Yeah.
And this idea that the Nazis would be allowed to give a defense of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
um, this stunned them. Why would we do that?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because the Nazis, of course, then would compare things that Germany had done in the war with things the Soviet Union had done in the war.
Yeah.
And so there's that element to the trial too. But she gives a very balanced account of what the various national groups wanted and how they approached the trial.
Yeah.
Book, I think.
Yeah. That is just fascinating. It's just so cool. So yeah. Or I think it's a really undermined, I think, part. I don't think a lot of people talk about the Nuremberg trials as much as they are accounted for and maybe did at some point. I feel like sometimes, especially I think people nowadays, I don't really think about it. So
Yeah.
it's just something I think about. Well, anyways, I'm gonna get going. But thanks
Take
again.
care.
Seriously, I do really
Yeah,
appreciate
this
it.
is, I very much appreciate this. This was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Good.
Thank you.
I'm glad it was enjoyable.
I think
That's what I'm trying to
what
go
you're doing
for.
is great.
Good. Good. Yeah. Take it
Yeah.
easy. Have
Mhm.
fun teaching, whatever it may be.
Okay.
Yeah.
You too.
Have a good day.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye. Bye. Bye.